And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan. Here we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And we have a program where some dreams came true for some folks who basically created, I guess you could call it, an empire that has lasted many, many years, and we're going to find out about how that all happened. Our very special guest here on the program is the author of a book that I encourage you to get a copy of, very insightful. It's called The Sassoons, The Great Global Merchants and the Making of an Empire. Jospeh Sassoon is our guest, and I want to thank you so much all the way from our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you, Richard, for having me. Appreciate it.
This is an interesting story for a lot of reasons, and I'm going to come at it from the standpoint of ignorance, shall we say, okay? Because sometimes the better questions come from ignorance rather than having read the book. And, okay, so you said in chapter thus and such. So where originally, starting, let's say, from the beginning, originally, where are the Sassoons, the Sassoon family, from globally?
Baghdad, which is the capital of what is now Iraq. It used to be part of the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century, but Baghdad was their home.
And when was the, would I be correct in saying the immigration or the move from Baghdad to the United States? When did that take place?
So the family goes back many generations there, and it was in a very good position. But the governor at the time, which was appointed by the empire, was a very corrupt one. One of the family members, David Sassoon, and his father had to flee the country in 1830. So we're talking about 190 years ago.
Wow. And they were fleeing what, religious persecution?
No. What this governor had to do was nothing to do with religion.
Okay.
Any merchant family or family with wealth, he would arrest one of their children, and until they pay him a ransom, he would not release it. I mean, it was a real mafia work of the 1830s.
Wow. It's almost the equivalent of what they're doing today on the internet with all this ransomware.
Exactly. And so he knew, the son was arrested once, the father paid a ransom, but realized this guy is not going to stop once, he's just going to keep going.
Yeah.
So in the middle of the night, they flee Baghdad, they go via Iran, and there they sit. The father dies there after a few months, and the son ponders where to go next. He didn't want to go back because of this corrupt governor, and he makes an interesting decision to go to Bombay, which is what is now Mumbai in India. You have to really think about it in those terms. 1830, 31. You're sitting in the middle of nowhere in Iran and making a decision to take your family, at the time a wife and four children, and head to somewhere where you don't know anyone, you don't speak the language, based on one thing only. You heard from traders and merchants and sailors that in India you go, you work, you make progress, you build your story, and you do whatever you want, and they don't care about religion or sect.
Okay. And this was during a time here in this country, in the United States, what one might say, especially out in the West, sort of the wild, wild West. What was it like back then in the 1830s, 40s, and so forth? Was it just as wild abroad?
Not at all. And when I am giving speeches and talks here, people say to me when I show a map, and in the book there is a beautiful map of where all the places they were, they say, wait a second, where is the United States? And I say, well, unfortunately, by the 1850s, 60s, there were so many problems. And then there was a civil war in this country.
Yeah.
That did not exist. It's fascinating because Bombay was really a sophisticated city, very small. Today, it's, by the way, about 22, 24 million. It had only 250,000 from different nationalities, from different religions, mostly merchants, agents, trade. They worked, they competed, but there was a fundamental respect between all those different competitors that unfortunately doesn't exist our days.
It's and the other aspect of it too, and I because of in terms of bringing this up was also travel was not that easy, and of course when you're talking about traveling through Persia and so forth in that part of the world, you're not taking boats, you're not taking ocean liners or what have you that was available back then because you're talking about desert, and so
This is this
you're
is
traveling.
one of the it's sometimes land routes followed by sea route.
Hmm.
And the sea route, I mean, even let's say from Bombay to Hong Kong or Shanghai, used to take 3 weeks in a boat. You have to understand it's not an ocean liner.
Right.
First of all, there were monsoon. A lot of these boats got wrecked. Diseases on the boat. I mean, you name it. Something like 15, 20% of the boats never reached their destination. So, what really shook me at the time is not only how much they traveled for business, but by the 1850s, 60s, they were going on excursions. One member goes to Japan because he likes it there and he likes the food and the weather. Someone else, age 17, goes all the way from Bombay to Norway to climb a mountain and sends I mean, it's really amazing when you think about it compared to our days.
Indeed, and even back then, though, there were people, young and old alike, who wanted to have that kind of an adventure. They wanted to get away from what they may have been experiencing, whether it be some form of oppression, tyranny and so forth. But at the same time, also saying, there's so much out there, and I just want to explore, and I want to see what's out there, and they would take off. The closest that I can get, as far as not so much personal experience, because I'm not that traveled. I've been out of the country to the south only on a cruise ship to the Mexican Riviera back in the 90s, and then in the early 2000s I went twice to Ireland via England. That's about the extent of my travels. And I know that there are so many incredible places. Now, you said that your ancestors, they went from, of course, as you say, from Iraq and to Iran, and then to
India.
India. Is when was the idea to get into, shall we say, the business that the Sassoon family is known for? When was that idea hatched, so to speak, or culminating?
So when he got there, he realized that most of the people he's meeting are engaged in trade in one way or another because Bombay was already a hub, an important port. And India was exporting a lot to Europe and particularly to Britain. Um, he started really very small. There isn't, a one event or something like that that takes place
Hmm.
that changed his career. Absolutely not. It was really, step by step. He kept building contacts. He kept building networks. Um, throughout not only India, but outside India. Um, and he took advantages. It's interesting. He entered the cotton trade at the end of the, in a big way in the end of the 1840s, when he heard in the news that the United States is having a bad harvest in cotton. And he noticed that the prices was going up everywhere in the world. But there were also other events taking place. There were the Opium Wars, where the British fought the Chinese and forced them to accept to buy opium from India. So the business developed slowly but surely. But just a quick thing to go back on the travel. Two things really very important for the listeners. One, the vast majority of countries in the world did not have a passport. So there is no such a thing. When you traveled from somewhere to somewhere else, even far, you went around in your own city and said, hey, has anyone gone there? And if they did, they will give you a letter of introduction to someone who's living. The other thing which really took me by surprise, how young these men were, and later on the women, to be traveling. So David Sassoon heard, again, we have no internet, we have no telegraph. He heard in Indian circles, wow, there is an amazing opportunity in China, that China is even bigger than India. Well, he tells his second son, who just barely turned 17, hey, go to China, explore it, and come back and tell us or write us whether there are really good opportunities. Now, think about it in today's terms, sending a 17-year-old son on their own with nothing, no language, no knowledge, no person there. You're just traveling from one place to another to establish whether there are incredible opportunities. He, of course, sends him back the report. Absolutely, China has amazing opportunities. We need to establish. So they begin in Hong Kong, then they move to Shanghai, and then to other port cities in China. From there, they go to Indonesia, to Burma, to Japan, and then later on by the 1850s to England, where London was the financial city of the world at the time.
We're talking with Jospeh Sassoon. We're talking about the Sassoon family. Of course, the term is used, the Sassoon Empire. How would I classify this? The clothing or the fashion world? Is that how would you describe the empire? What is it?
Well, it's a very large business empire in the sense of it covered almost all commodities. We were talking before about maritime. They went into the maritime insurance. When technology came, whether it's telegraph, but also new ships that can travel faster, they immediately started investing in that, buying those ships. They even later on started buying docks. And if you go to India today, in Mumbai, you can ask any taxi driver to take you to the Sassoon docks. They still exist there. And a lot of the buildings in India still kept the name Sassoon.
We're going to continue talking with Jospeh Sassoon here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is really a pleasure to have Jospeh Sassoon, I guess you could say one of the heirs to the Sassoon Empire, if you will. Are you heavily involved today in, and again, I hope I'm accurately saying this, are you involved in the empire directly into any one of the businesses, or have you sort of, I don't want to say divested yourself, but said, look, I know that's the family business, but there's something else I'd rather do?
No, so the book is really about the rise and demise of this big empire. there is no more empire. There is no more business.
Okay.
The business goes sideways after World War One, and definitely in a huge decline at the end of World War Two. And why? One of the major events that take place is 1949, when the Chinese Communist Party took over. They nationalized all foreign assets, including for the Sassoons, who became British since the 1830s. One of the Sassoons in the 1920s, Victor Sassoon, built the first skyscraper in Shanghai. He came to the realization that the land, after studying it with engineers, is very similar to the land in Manhattan. So he brought an engineering firm from Manhattan and built the first skyscraper, which again still exists as a hotel. It's now owned by the Fairmont hotel chains. It's a beautiful building over the bay. But outside, it's still called the Sassoon building. And upstairs, if you go to the presidential suite, it's still called the Sassoon suite. But its names here and there, there is a Sassoon library, there is a Sassoon docks. But apart from those names, there is no empire. So I am just an academic who teaches at Georgetown University.
I'm curious, how tall is that skyscraper?
Well, relatively not tall. I think it's 16 floors, which was considered very high at the time. It was definitely the highest building for many years in the 1920s, 30s in Shanghai.
Yeah. And of course, now we're literally into the hundreds.
Exactly.
Stories, and that can get a little scary. I was watching a program the other day, and they're having a conference or a meeting or whatever. All of a sudden you hear this groaning sound, and one guy said, "What is that?" Well, this building is so tall that every so often when the winds are blowing, the building tends to move a little bit, and that's the sound. And that's normal. That's supposed to happen. And I'm going, not with me, I'm getting out.
Yeah, I mean, in Dubai, in the Gulf, they have a building, I think 124. And it's really an amazing experience when you take the elevator, because it's going so fast. It feels like, your ears are popping out because of the speed it's going up and down.
Well, I'll tell you that a movie that came out in the 70s that I watched, and again, that also got me to question how high is too high. The movie was The Towering Inferno.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm thinking, I'm not sure I want to go up that high. I don't have fear of heights. I have height anxiety. I'll go up to the 110th floor. But I'm going to be looking out the window going, what do I hold on to so I don't fall? This is it's interesting too how, I'm familiar with the name Sassoon. Because I still see every once in a while, maybe an advertisement in a magazine or newspaper, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's my imagination, but when I first saw the title of the book, I'm going, oh wow, these folks are still, they're still doing stuff. Is there any remnant?
No,
still functioning?
So people in this country confuse it with two other Sassoon products, which have nothing to do with the family and nothing with the story. One is Vidal Sassoon, who had shampoo business. He moved to LA actually, but he's not a member of the family, and that's where that name used to be quite familiar. There was also in the 70s and 80s Sassoon jeans.
Oh yeah.
And that again, it has nothing to do with the family. So unfortunately, I can't get claim. I used to get a lot of times at airports or immigration saying, "Hey, do you have shampoo on you?"
Can I get a pair of jeans?
Exactly.
You know, and that's really interesting too, because as the Earth has gotten smaller, so to speak, in terms of our ability to travel, and of course, family names travel all over the place. I find it interesting. You know, you talk about these two examples of the Sassoon name being heard, not connected. I'm watching television programs and movies, and every once in a while, they'll have a character whose last name is Dugan, and I'm going, well, that's interesting. I mean, well, why did they choose Dugan? I mean, that's kind of nice. I mean, a little representation here, but it's kind of weird to hear that in the movies and television. But by the same token, if you're saying in the context of the rise and then, shall we say, the fall of the empire, there is no remnant left. But at the same time, here you are sharing the story of the family, your ancestry, and your family, the ancestry, if I am correct in what I was looking at, were Jewish. Is that correct?
Yes.
In Iran,
In Baghdad.
in Baghdad,
Yes.
which seems, I don't know, at least from my perspective, and maybe I'm superimposing today's concept of who lives in Iraq and Iran. But I'm guessing that Jews were scattered far and wide in the 1800s, not just in Israel. They were all over the place.
Well, actually, in the origins of the community in Baghdad, or what was at the time before Iraq called Babylon,
Mm-hmm.
goes back 2,500 years.
Mm-hmm.
There was a very large community. In fact, about 15% of the total population of what is now called Iraq. The name Iraq didn't come into existence until 1920, almost 100 years after the beginning of our story. But there was Baghdad. No, so they always belonged there. And then they left, continued with their Jewish tradition in India, in China. However, by the third and fourth generation, they became very aristocratic English, and they started not only leaving the religion, but denying that their origins were Jewish or Baghdadis, because they wanted to be part and parcel of the English aristocracy.
We're talking with Joseph Sassoon. He is sharing the story of the Sassoon family, going back again to, as he's shared with us already, the 1830s. And we're talking about a book that he has put together called The Sassoons, The Great Global Merchants and the Making of an Empire. Joseph Sassoon is my guest, and you're listening to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we are talking about a family that, quite honestly, and I kind of want to go here now, changed a lot of what we know today. That if I'm curious, if we were to remove, Joseph, if we were to remove the Sassoon family from history, the globe, the economics, and so on and so on and so on, would be totally different than it is today because of the impact that the Sassoon family has had. Is that would that be a fair assessment? They
To
were.
a certain extent, every large merchant family or dynasty that was created contributed something. There were some fascinating aspects. One, how do you develop a network when you don't meet your other counterparts? How do you develop a network that you can rely on when you're never meeting them in person? And it's really fascinating. So the family built all around one thing and one thing only: trust. And they never signed a contract with their agents, with the other merchants. It was always, my word is my bond. And it really changed the way we look at the trading, because to a certain extent, That continues in a lot of, in the financial world, when two traders are talking on the phone, they're not signing contracts. I buy from you X number of shares or bonds, and I know you're going to pay me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm delivering those shares. So I think this is really very important at the time, and that a trust becomes so critical for everything they do. In their correspondence, they never really cared about nationality, religion, identity of who their correspondents and agents and merchants are. They always asked a simple question: can we trust this counterpart? Yes, do the business. No, walk away quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really a fundamental thing that continues 200 years later.
And it brings up an interesting point. How do they know this? I'm curious. Was it extensive investigation by whomever, like we have today, intelligence in all kinds
Yes.
of corporations, or were they trusting and listening to that inner voice, that still small voice? They were trusting their intuition.
So this is one of the most fascinating things that I came across, because I kept asking, if you're dealing with some trader in the middle of nowhere in Japan, how do you know? Well, something goes around, is called reputation. And the founder of the dynasty, David Sassoon, kept saying to his children in all the letters, listen, you make a bad investment, you lose money, but you do another one, maybe you lose again, but you can regain the money. You have many chances. Reputation, it's one way. Only once in your lifetime. You lose it, you're gone. And that becomes critical for all the other traders, because even mistakenly, if someone's reputation is mired, you really have a problem to change that. But it's fascinating how traders, travelers, merchants, sailors went around, and you would ask, hey, did you hear about this trader in this place or that country? And they said yes or no. His reputation a preceded thing. And they accumulate that knowledge. Another thing that helped the family, he spread his members of the family, all the sons in different places, all the sons-in-laws in different places. So you have a very reliable network of family members, then close associates, then close merchants and counterparts that you have been trading with. And as a result, within 3 weeks, 4 weeks of sending a letter from A to B, you said, I want to do this trade in silk. Is it reputable? Yes, no, or there was a problem. And that's how it developed.
So reputation is very, very important, and even to this day, reputation
Correct.
is important. And of course, in the global marketplace that we have today, reputation can be made or broken instantly because
Yeah.
of the technologies that we have today. Whereas, I'm sure back then, if your reputation was poor, or it took a while for it to spread, but it would spread like wildfire.
It spread, and it was very difficult to correct it.
Yeah. It's probably it was as hard to correct it then as it is to get back your identity if your identity's been stolen today.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Jospeh Sassoon is my guest. We're talking about the Sassoon family and their empire and the rise and fall, if you will. We're going to continue doing so right here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Jospeh Sassoon, who is a professor at Georgetown University, if I'm correct. And you delve into some very interesting subjects that you find interesting, obviously, and you share that with students who are attending the universities and so forth. You hold a number of different positions and what have you. But one of the things I find so fascinating, one of the areas that you delve into is political economy, political economy. And that's an interesting mix. I know that politics can affect the economy and vice versa, but I have never really thought of it in the context of being a single entity, so to speak. Can you describe briefly what that is? What is political economy? What is
Yeah, I
political
mean,
economy?
my area of specialty is really, apart from this book that I've written, is also working on the Middle East and authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
And there, politics and economics are interrelated. Um, all the economic decisions that are made are connected to political survival of the rulers. If you look at the different, and I wrote a book called Anatomy of Authoritarianism in the Arab Republics. I wrote a book. I was the first academic to look at the archives that the U.S. has taken out from Iraq after the 2003 invasion, and built around it all the structure of the rulers, particularly Saddam Hussein in Iraq and his party. And what you become to understand is how economics is not seen as a separate entity like here or in Europe. It is part of how you run the country in order to stay in power. And that is really kind of the definition of political economy.
Whereas in this country, it's rhetoric, telling the people what they want to hear in order to stay in power, and then supposedly doing certain things. Although it seems as though, as you say, it's separate here, and yet at the same time, it does seem to have an impact on our economics, and the economy will have an impact on the political fortunes and futures of certain individuals. I think that's one of the things too that I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, and that is the difference between the East and the West, as we'll term it, the East and the West. I interviewed a woman many years ago having to do with doing business specifically in China, and that you cannot go to China or have business dealings with the Chinese the way you do here in America. Because if you do, you could potentially start an international incident, because you have to understand the culture of that country, specific, in this case, China. Is that one of the big mistakes that we in the West make in terms of business in dealing with, how do I put this, the Arab world, I guess, or Europe, or again, China, because we think that we are so great, America, that we can call the shots, and that they're just a bunch of silly people that we can manipulate, and we can get to bend to whatever whim we see fit. And yet, what do we have today? We've got these diametrically opposed concepts, and we then have problems between the East and the West. One of the things that I found fascinating years ago, there was a story about it was coming in from, I think it was coming in from China, L-tryptophan, a supplement. And 400 people had suffered adverse effects from this, and yet who knows how many millions had been taking it, but only 400. And so our government banned it in the United States, coming in from China. And I thought, that's interesting, because you can have 400 people have adverse effects from various pharmaceuticals made in this country, and they do nothing. So I'm just curious as to the American attitude and mentality in business dealing with other parts of the world?
So going back to the book, which is really interesting and taking you back to the 19th century, it's very interesting that in anywhere you went, I mean, English was prevalent, obviously in India, but also in other parts. When they went to China, one of the mistakes they made, I think, in the long run, they used to, in any country, learn the language, the tradition of where they are. They didn't do the same in China. Further than there was the issue that you could not, as a non-Chinese, deal with a Chinese trader directly. You have to use an agent, a Chinese agent, who basically negotiates on your behalf. So already going back to the 19th century, these borders, trade borders, artificial borders were created within China between traders who wanted to do business in China with the locals. So it's very important. I think part of the issue, what gave them strength but some of their weakness, is whether you're trading in the 19th century or the 21st century, whether you're dealing in politics or other aspects, the lack of understanding of the culture, the language, the history is a huge difference and a huge problem in anything you're doing. Mm-hmm. Whether you're trading, whether you're politically negotiating, or whether you're invading, or you're going to war, you need to know the other party. And the other party, you know it by knowing their language, understanding their culture, and understanding their strength and weaknesses, not from your point of view, but from what is really in the field itself.
Mm-hmm. What about this aspect you talked earlier about, because you've written about it as well, it's one of your interests, is this whole aspect of authoritarianism. We still have that in various parts of the globe, in different countries.
Yeah, I mean,
matter of fact, there would be those who would say that we came very close to having that happen here in the United States just recently.
Yeah, I mean, probably if you take by population, 70% of the world's population today live under authoritarian rules, which is scary, really. And yeah, I think there is a danger everywhere. Mm-hmm. That authoritarianism or people in power will not want to move away from power. I mean, I'm sure you're watching what was happening in Brazil. They came that far from, the fear that the losing president will say, "I don't accept," and there would have been clashes. I mean,
yeah,
we'll see how it develops. But this notion that exists in so many countries that the ruler is there to stay forever exists. And if you look in most of the Arab world, if you look in many other countries around the world, and you see that in Russia, he announced himself to be president for life. You can't expect changes then.
Yeah. I have to say there was a humorous side to this. The former ruler of Iran, Saddam Hussein, apparently he held an election. Before the election was actually ever held, before anybody ever cast a vote, he said he won by 95%.
Well, I'll tell you the story because I researched it in Iraq, and this was in 1999. In 1995, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He did, and actually it was not 95. He did a referendum. And the referendum is, who do you want to be your president? But guess the funny thing, there was only one contender. That was him. So I listened to the audio tape of the meeting when they're coming to tell him the good results. And they said to him, it's 99.5% voted for you, Mr. President. And they thought they're giving him the good news. There was silence in the audio. And then he says, wait a second. So if 0.5% didn't vote for me, and he was obviously calculating numbers on a piece of paper, that means 25,000 people didn't get your message. So I'm not sure you have done a good job.
Wow.
In 1999, they redid the referendum, and guess what? He was again the only contender, and the result was 100-0-2. So it came over 100. They said, why take any chance?
Exactly. My heavens. Well, we've had our little situations here in this country in the last few elections, and it is on the one hand a little scary, but I also still remind people that everything is temporary. Yeah, it may go on for 40 or 50 or 60 years, but it's still temporary in the grand scheme of things. The other side of it too, though, is if the people were to rise up and say, let's just say China has 1 billion people, right? Okay, and let's say the Chinese people decide
Million and a half. Yes, go ahead.
1.5 million, and they decided to rise up and say, you know what? We're going to take over. They can't kill us all. Okay? I just sit here and I go, okay, well, the people are the ones. It's like in this country, we have those founding documents and they start out with, we the people. And I think about that in terms of, well, they can't kill all 350 million of us, you know. It's like fear is the main motivator.
I studied enough of authoritarianism. I can tell you the biggest component is fear.
Mm-hmm.
That is really what it's based on. And fear is a very big factor. It's easy to talk about going out to the street, but when you're seeing so many people being killed in front of you, look what's happening now in Iran with these women who are so amazingly brave, going out knowing there is 1 in 2 chance that they're going to kill you. They're already killed 250 people. It's very difficult to keep going out and doing it. And there is family pressure. Look, life is precious. It's not that simple yes, you're right. Technically, if everyone goes out, if the whole city tomorrow of whatever city and anywhere in the world goes out, you can't kill all of them. But there has been incidents where some of these regimes killed thousands. I mean, and they don't hesitate about that.
Yeah, we look back in history and we can see that has been done over and over and over again.
And in the 20th century and now the 21st century, there are multiple examples.
Yeah. Hard to believe that we've already been through 1/5 of the century and we've had so much turmoil, death and destruction and so forth. Just man upon man, not even natural disasters. Right. Natural disasters we can deal with, because there's nothing, we can't control that. But you'd think that after so many centuries, we would have learned some lessons. What do you think about the phrase, that if we refuse to learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it? Would it be your estimation that we are not learning from history, and that's why we keep repeating it over and over and over again?
I think to a certain extent. I mean, look, after World War II, we thought we're never going to go to another war. And we're almost at the brink. You keep reading that Putin is thinking of nuclear. I think that how leaders also are rising and basing on authoritarian or fear. We witnessed all this stuff before.
Well, I will tell you that one of the things that is so frustrating for me is the fact that I'm only 62. My father's 91. I'm frustrated over the way things are, politically, economically, militarily, etc., etc., etc. I can only imagine the level of frustration my father must feel, and quite honestly, this is said humorously, folks. My father and mother were having this conversation shortly after the passing of my eldest sister, and my father, was very close to her, and he said, "You know what? I'm just tired. I just want to go. I just want to go." Now, he had just had his physical. He is perfectly healthy with the usual conditions of old age, a little instability in walking. He's always had poor vision. He wears hearing aids, that kind of thing. But other than that, his metabolism's great. His processes are running properly. And so he says to my mom this, he says, I'm just ready to go. To which my mother, who knows all of this about his health, says, okay, so what are you going to die of? You know, but I know that a lot of people are feeling that way, especially after this pandemic that we've been through, which I actually looked at from a positive sense, that we decided to do something different. We did something different this time when something hit the fan. And so that means that the outcome is going to be different. And the other part of it was, imagine the opportunities that lay before us. And this was back in March of 2020, I was thinking this, that we don't even know exist yet. And I mean, there were people who around the world stepped up to help their fellow man and woman across the globe. It was fantastic. And there are people who, maybe not intentionally, they actually thrived during the pandemic because they were taking care of self, but also giving, putting out there. And yes, maybe they charged a few dollars for this, that, and the other thing, but their goal wasn't to try to make millions of dollars off of the suffering. It was to help.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I look at the COVID story from beginning to end, and I think it's an optimistic story.
Yes.
Because in March 2020, if you go back to newspaper, they all said, this is a virus. It usually takes 5 years for a vaccination. 5 years, that's the average, some of them longer. And here we were 9 months getting vaccinations, which saved millions of people around the world. And now they're talking that some of the systems that were used can also start being used for certain cancer diseases. I think it's a very, very optimistic story about the resilience of humans.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more in that fact because I and my wife, I continued to work. I continued to come in and do the job that I do because, first of all, we have a minimal staff of one or two. We also did not allow our programmers to come in. We do everything by Zoom, as you and I are conversing here.
Yeah.
And actually, many of them have chosen to stay on Zoom and continue to do their programs, which is kind of nice in one sense. But I continued to work, and of course, I wasn't afraid of contracting the virus because my goal has always been for many, many years making sure my immune system was strengthened, doing the right things in that way. And I did actually, at one point, I did test positive, but I didn't have any symptoms, so I guess I was asymptomatic. And then finally, when I tested negative, I thought, "Oh, good, I'm free again. I can move about freely again." And my wife, she was positive, and of course we're living together. People say, "Well, you should go live out in your trailer," which we have, a travel trailer, and I said, "No, it's too late for that. If she tested positive, I've already been around her, so there's no point in me going away." And we both got through that. and we've made it through the other side. And you sound to me like you are, in spite of everything that's going on, and not just COVID, but you sound rather optimistic about the future for humanity in general. Is that a fair assessment?
I mean, I think you'll learn, whether in this book or studying other countries, the resilience of the people is always absolutely amazing. The ability to keep going and going and going. And in this country, there is a strong tradition of keep going in spite of the difficulties. Now, can there be a disaster like a nuclear war, which we never had anything to do with it, and because it was imposed? Could be. I hope not. But otherwise, with all the difficulties that are facing the world, yeah, I am in general optimistic that people will always figure out a way to deal with it and move forward.
Hmm. Joseph Sassoon is my guest. Author of the Sassoons, is dealing with the rise and the fall of the Sassoon Empire from the early mid 1800s into the 1900s, and that's always confused me. Okay, you're talking about the 1800s, which is actually the 19th century.
Yes.
Okay, I understand why that is, but why can't we just call it the 18th century? But anyway, that's another conversation for another program, not necessarily for Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Joseph Sassoon is my guest. I want to ask you, in light of what we were just talking about, and I will tell you that I had a conversation with my late sister 3 months before her passing, and we were chatting away about different things, and then we started to get into the real serious stuff. And I asked her, I said, "Are you ready?" And her answer was, "Yes and no." And I'm going, "Oh, seriously? Yes and no?" I'm curious. For me, if today were my day, I'm ready. Is there more I want to do? Absolutely. How about you? If today were your day, are you ready?
No.
Okay. Okay.
I tell you, I have now. The book was dedicated to my grandchild. She's now 4. When COVID hit, and I was in the middle of writing the book, it's wonderful to see someone who was 1.5 years old, has no care in the world apart from having fun. She was the only person that made me continue doing what I am doing, because she's the only person who never talks about politics, about economics, about the university, about COVID. She just want to have fun.
Yeah.
And for the few hours, and because my daughter lives nearby and we were taking care of the granddaughter, those everyday 4 or 5 hours were the biggest fun. There was no worries.
Mm.
And when you see them growing up, it's just a delight. I guess I would like to keep seeing that, going forward.
Yeah. And I certainly do understand why the answer is no. Um, but let's look at it from a deeper perspective. Um, my sister, of course, her no was because she didn't want to leave her daughter and her husband behind. The
Yeah.
leaving them with taking care of everything, and themselves as well. But from a more metaphysical or spiritual perspective, she says, "Yeah, I'm ready. I have no fear. I'm ready. I'm just ready." And from her perspective, her beliefs and her faith, she was. And I learned after the fact from my mother and other sisters that she, in spite of all of the health issues that she was suffering throughout her entire life, she was never bitter. I just thought, wow, that is remarkable.
But it does come with age. I mean, my mother died earlier this year, 96 and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me a year before, I'm ready. During COVID, she told me, I sent a letter to, and I didn't get, is the post working. I said, Mom, why are you sending letters? Who send letters these days? Who did you send? She said, I sent a letter to God telling him I'm ready.
Ah.
I said to her, well, he's very busy now with COVID. There is a long time, waiting time. I mean, it's different at the age, but part of it was very interesting. She was very, very healthy, extremely healthy. And she was outgoing. But I think people at certain age with the restrictions, she kept saying, I'm bored. What do you want me to do?
Let's play some Parcheesi.
Yeah. Well, during COVID, she couldn't go out. She couldn't do this. She was traveling until a few years before.
Yeah, it can certainly make a big difference in one's attitude. I guess I'm fortunate because I was still working. I was still coming down the hill from where
Yeah.
we live into Santa Barbara and going to work and doing these interviews and having a great time in that respect. And there were so many other people who weren't, and so forth. And I know that it got to be very, very wearing on people across the country and around the world for that matter. And now they're saying that we're headed for sort of a second, shall we say, pandemic, that being the pandemic of dealing with the issue of mental health and well-being. I know too that as we were going through it, the people that I had surrounding me, we would all be talking about how we got to take care of ourselves. Take care of you. Take care of number one. Do some things that make you happy. What makes you happy?
Swimming.
Ah,
I try 4 or 5 times a week. I go to the pool. I come out. Those half an hour of swimming, I feel in a different world.
I can't remember the last time I swam, and I live by the ocean.
Exactly.
Well, I find it interesting too that the subjects that you cover could be real downers. Just looking at this kind of stuff, I often joke about economists. Will Rogers said once, you could take 100 economists, lay them end to end, and they'd still all point in different directions. And I've often asked, so economists, what numbers would make you happy? Because we want you happy. I mean, the pursuit of happiness is part of one of our inalienable rights here in America. So what numbers would make you happy? Because when they're low, we know you're not happy. And even when they're high, you're not happy, you know. So I kind of joke about that. And it seems as though there's got to be something more than the economy being the key to our survival and civilization. What about you? In spite of the fact that you study all of this and you teach it as well, and it intrigues you, I don't know. I don't know if I'm being naive to think that I just cannot believe. Yeah, I know I've got to work and make some money to put food on the table and gas in the truck and so forth. But there's got to be, as that song goes, is that all there is? Is the economy?
No, you need to do other things. I mean, I think the countries that have the happiest population are people who have real hobbies. It doesn't matter whether it's walking by the beach, whether it's gardening, whether it's building something with your own hands, whether reading, whether watching television or something that keeps your mind going. It's really critical.
Yeah.
I also derive a lot of pleasure of teaching young people because each year, there is a new crop and you see them different ages. And some of them I stay in touch with, and there is nothing that gives me more happiness than, this is students that I taught 10, 15 years ago is now in the government or in a company or something and is really successful. Another one has done something amazing. It gives me a lot of satisfaction and happiness.
Joseph Sassoon is my guest. His book is The Sassoons, and it has to do, of course, with the family, the empire, if you will, the Sassoons, the great global merchants, and the making of an empire. Is there a website that we can send people to find out more about
I
you?
mean, Amazon is the easiest thing
Okay.
with a little discount. I think you just go and put Amazon, Sassoon, Joseph Sassoon, or the Sassoons, and you will get it there. There is an audio also for the people who like an audio that they prefer rather than reading.
Oh, I love that. I love it. Audio books. As a kid growing up, I was listening to, they weren't called Audible. Back then, they were called talking books for the blind and
Exactly.
recordings for the blind, because I was a client at that time and loved listening to. And now I just happen to be a narrator for some books as well. So it's a wonderful experience to listen, and it's a fabulous opportunity for folks to read. And I still consider listening reading when you're talking about this. Joseph,
Absolutely.
yeah, Joseph Sassoon, my guest. This is Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Joseph Sassoon, I want to thank you for giving us so much time here on the program, sharing your story and the story of your family, and the information that's there. Do you find that that history overall has been kind, from your perspective, to the Sassoon family?
I think so. I think so. I think it's the story of a refugee who arrived somewhere, built something. History was kind. I think the mistakes were their mistakes, their misinterpretation of events in the 20th century is really what led to that. Change of identity, change of work ethic is really one of the main reasons that led to this demise. So I think overall, yes, history was kind to them.
Well, I have three final questions that I like to ask all of my guests, and you've sort of kind of answered one of them, but I'm going to ask all three of them just the same because I like to ask them directly. And we'll do that as soon as I let you, the listener and the viewer, know that you are listening to as well as watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. As we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true, we are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m. We have a special edition of Tell Me Your Story on Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and we stream those broadcasts live at richarddugan.com. Podcasts are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, and many other locations. And of course, as I said, you can watch these interviews on YouTube. We have a channel, Richard Dugan and Tell Me Your Story. We hope that you will do just that. With all of that said, there's more that I could add to that, but I'm not going to because I want to get to these three questions to our guest, Joseph Sassoon. And the first of those three questions is, who is Joseph Sassoon?
Well, Joseph Sassoon is someone who also was a refugee at some point in his life. I actually was born in Baghdad and escaped with my family when I was a teenager in the 1970s from Saddam Hussein's regime, and built a new life, first in England and then in the US. Um, that's the parallel with the David Sassoon.
Mm-hmm. What is your life's purpose?
I think life purposes changes with time. I think, family becomes more important. I think pushing myself was always critical. Exploring in new areas, learning in new things will always be important.
And finally, what was your best day?
When my first daughter was born, I thought I'm gonna take off in the air just with happiness, holding her in my hand.
Well, Joseph, I want to thank you for sharing this time with us, telling us your story and that of your families as well. And I hope people will go to Amazon and pick up a copy of The Sassoons. And again, it's been a great pleasure to meet you, to get to know you, and to share you with our listeners.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate having me.
And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal and Jeanette, I am listening.